We are live for the MMA Prospectus. Once again, I'm joined by Tom Grant. We are talking UFC. Mostly we're talking UFC bantamweights this week because we've got UFC Vegas here coming up, Garbrandt versus Almeida, and it just seems like the right time to talk UFC bantamweights. We'll be talking a few other guys out there in the world, who are doing their thing. But mostly this is going to be a show about the bantamweights in the UFC. And this is a card that's showcasing three of the best of them. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree. The bantamweight division is a little bit of a weird division. Like, we started out with, okay, so you go back, 5 years, 6 years, and bantamweight is essentially the flyweight of the UFC. Like, it's just this really thin division. There's barely anyone fighting in it. Most of the best fighters are guys who drop down from featherweight at that point, or actually conversely, also flyweights who were fighting up a division. So, like, there were very few true bantamweights at that time who were, like, really making names for themselves. Because if I'm remembering correctly, even Dominic Cruz was fighting at featherweight at the beginning of his career.
Mm-hmm.
So it was this kind of like bastardized division, and then it started getting some real play. We had Dominic Cruz take over the division, and then we had Renan Barão's whole run. And we got this big influx of talent that all hit the UFC at the same time, around about. And now they're all climbing the division because there is very little between being a really good prospect in the bantamweight division and being a top 15 guy. If you're really good, you're going to be in that top 15 really fast. And I think all three of our guys are top 15, or is Garbrandt not?
Garbrandt may not be ranked yet.
But he's a top 15 talent.
Yeah. Garbrandt is not yet ranked, but he's on his way. Well, the interesting thing to me with bantamweight, you talked about it being sort of classically a bit of a misfit division, and I think it's one of those divisions. It reminds me a lot of I kind of compare it to light heavyweight, or or like middleweight. Actually, I compare it to middleweight. I think middleweight's a better comparison for bantamweight, where like below it or above bantamweight, you've got the classic divisions that are full of all the classic talent, featherweight, lightweight, welterweight. Those are where all your MMA fighters are going to fight there, essentially.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot for MMA.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if we're being real, 145 to 170 is like the sweet spot where MMA is getting real elite athletic talent coming to the sport.
Well, and it's just where, like, it's not, I don't even know it's necessarily where it's always elite athletic talent, but it's just where everybody is. It's where all of the people are. You take a cross-section of the human population, and 155 to 170 pounds for dudes is going to represent a shit ton of it.
Yeah.
And so you have these bookend divisions of bantamweight and middleweight, and to fight lower than bantamweight or higher than middleweight, you kind of have to be a freak of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're going to fight at light heavyweight or heavyweight, you have to be this massively outsized, tough as shit human being.
Yeah.
And if you want to fight at flyweight, you kind of have to be this mini speed-driven, insane athletic talent. Like, you can't be anything less than a super elite athlete and thrive at flyweight. If you want to fight below bantamweight. And so you get these divisions, middleweight and bantamweight, where the people that end up there end up being these kind of misfit talents. Like, they're very non-prototypical. And for a long time, because of all the injuries at the top of the division, and I think just because of its misfit nature, bantamweight seemed to kind of stagnate for like years on end.
Yeah, a little bit. Renan Barão was a nice shot in the arm for the division for a while. Like, he brought some real excitement into that division. Say what you will about how good of a fighter he turned out to be.
Yeah, but he definitely did. But the interesting thing that stagnation created was this sudden ability for, like, any potential talent that came in that could win 2 or 3 fights to just suddenly be a ranked top fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we've got these guys, like I said, 3 of them fighting today: Thomas Almeida, Aljamain Sterling, and Cody Garbrandt. Garbrandt is 3-0, and we're like, oh yeah, he's on his way to being a top 15 fighter. Aljamain Sterling and Thomas Almeida are both 4-0, and they're ranked 4 and 7 respectively in that division. Jimmy Rivera is now 14 at 3-0. Frankie Saenz is 13 at 3-1. And like, you know, people who even at middleweight, like the least experienced ranked middleweight out there is Thiago Santos at 5-2.
Yeah.
And even Uriah Hall who's ranked 10th is at 5-4 and has had 9 fights in the division, almost 10 fights in the UFC.
Well, and then like this is partially because the UFC rankings are insane.
Well, yeah,
but also because of like we're talking the relative lack of talent. Michael McDonald is 6. He had 1 fight since 2013. Like
I know it's just created this really strange thing at bantamweight where like you can climb that division with the same speed you can climb light heavyweight, despite it having twice as many fighters in it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and because you've got such a cross section of like it seems like there's almost like a missing generation there because you have like the Michael McDonald's who's like, oh man, Michael McDonald, he looks young. He's kind of got that baby face, so people are always like, oh man, he's only 25. He's really young. It's like, yeah, he fought in the WEC. Like, has been fighting since 2007. Like,
yeah, he started when he was 16.
Yeah, so like, yeah, he's a talented dude. But I mean, it's starting to show. It was starting to show a little bit that like even towards, Renan Barão and Uriah Faber just kind of cut through him.
Yeah. Well, there's this whole generation that was like Michael McDonald, Eric Perez, and Francisco Rivera and Mitch Gagnon.
Yeah.
Who were all sort of expected to be these top rising fighters, and they've either been out for years on end, or in Rivera's case, have just never quite managed to even out into a real elite talent.
Yeah.
So it's ended up being this really strange, funky division, and now we're talking about these. Even
when the UFC brought in the bantamweight division, the bantamweight division was never as unified in the WC as featherweight was.
Yeah.
And there was still a lot of other bantamweight going on around the world, specifically in Japan, and in Brazil to an extent. So it took a while to like unify that generation, and they just didn't live up to the Uriah Fabers and like those guys. And so I think we're seeing like that generational gap. Kind of thing we've been waiting for to happen in like light heavyweight and heavyweight, where it's like, seriously, when's like a crop of 3 pretty good fighters going to come and charge by all the 38-year-olds? You know,
I think UFC may have finally hit that with heavyweight. Now we'll see what Ngannou and Blades can do, and some of the other guys they brought in. But we talked about that last time.
Mm-hmm.
So of these 3 guys fighting today, who are you most excited for?
All right, so,
or not fighting today, this week.
Yeah, fighting this week. Out of all of them, well, I'm thinking Aljamain Sterling, but I'm kind of tempted to say Cody Garbrandt. Nothing against Thomas Almeida. Really fun fighter. I think
going with the dark horse here. Of all the 3, Garbrandt, huh?
I'm kind of between. I think Garbrandt has a ton of like natural talent that I'm not sure is going to get capitalized on. But I feel like of the 3, he is the most naturally gifted, especially when it comes to just punching power. Like, the guy doesn't have the best mechanics and still hits like a truck. So he's one of those that, like, if he at some point figures it all out, I think he could be like a pretty serious talent. Aljamain Sterling, I think, is only a hair behind in the athlete department, and I think has a better like overall skill set, but his striking still a little bit of like weird pieces that don't totally fit together. Thomas Almeida is the most like streamlined, has a game fighter, but I'm not sure he's ever gonna enter that like top 5 like area.
So you're going with Garbrandt. I want to hear. So do you think he's gonna win this fight then?
I think Almeida might get it just because of the Thomas Almeida we saw last time, a little bit more measured, a little bit less balls to the wall. He's got he's always had really good cardio, but against Burchak, like he seemed to finally kind of like click for him, where it's like, oh, I hit this guy good, but he's not hurt and he's not panicking, so I'm gonna back off and I'm gonna set up my next shot instead of just continuing to go, bonkers. And I think at this point, Almeida may get the win because I think Almeida is still going to be like a top 10 guy. I just kind of, to this day, I still kind of think he's a more of like a top 5 gatekeeper type. But not like I've never been wrong.
I have this sneaking suspicion because I think that is like, the common take on Almeida is that he's one of those. He is an elite action fighter, and the kind of person who might get several title shots in that sort of Donald Cerrone mode without ever winning. But I don't like. It could also be like sometimes guys like that can just carry themselves way further than you think they will. Like
Robbie Lawler.
Yeah, Robbie Lawler. Like it just, he has that. There's so much violence in his style that it's really like his margins for success are very wide.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd almost say in a way that maybe like are even wider than Donald Cerrone. Cerrone's always had the grappling to fall back on that really makes his margin of success a lot bigger than you would think otherwise, just based off his striking alone. But Almeida's striking style, like he doesn't necessarily have to be doing that well to just, to knock somebody out or to totally destroy them on the way to a win.
Yeah, and I totally admit that Cody Garbrandt is the kind of guy that is like a prospect scouter's gold in a certain way, that like just physically gifted but doesn't have a ton of craft to his game. And it's one of those things that as looking at it, you're like, okay, it's the classic, like you see 2 kids playing baseball and one of them runs to first base in perfect form and one of them runs to first base with terrible form, and they have the same time. So which guy do you take? And you take the one with terrible form because you can teach him better form and he'll get faster. Like that idea that like everything that's wrong with Garbrandt, or most of what's wrong with Garbrandt right now, is something that can be fixed. But it's a question of will it get fixed. And it's not like saying that Garbrandt's a trash fighter right now. He's a good fighter. He's a really good fighter. Still needs to put some pieces together. And if he does, he could be even better. Whereas Almeida, like, he looks like, despite the fact that he's been fighting for 5 years, he looks like he's on the verge of becoming like the fighter he's going to be. And it probably is good enough to get to a title. Like, and I think, barring Dominic Cruz suddenly looking old, I think Dominic Cruz would really do a number on him.
Sure. I mean, it's definitely the difficult thing to me is always with fighters like that. And looking at somebody like Thomas Almeida, it's really tough to tell what clicking will do for him. And I don't know, that's sort of my pet term for just when a fighter gets passes the experience gap of being raw to being experienced. And it's really like some guys, you just think it's like, okay, well, he's done. I've seen everything I can see out of this guy. And suddenly their timing and form just sort of coalesces. And you're like, holy shit, this guy is way better than I thought he was going to be.
Yep, that when they just start firing on all cylinders and they're in that perfect form, like physical prime and experience and comfort in there, and then suddenly their game takes off. Yeah, Almeida might be one of those guys. Like, we've got 3 really good guys coming out of this card in terms of And I think Almeida's further down the line, so I wouldn't be shocked if he got the win over Garbrandt. But in like 4 years, we're talking about Garbrandt being like a top bantamweight.
That's true. I will say this because they all have they're all great athletes. They all come from very strong clinical backgrounds, technical backgrounds. They've come to MMA with real technical skill in other combat sports. I do have to say that it does feel to me most like Aljamain Sterling is a fighter that would be most likely to win a title at some point in his career because he's got the best coaching behind him. And that, like, in the mindset that coaching should count for a lot, whether it always does or not, I have to take that into account and be like, you got Almeida at Shoot to Box, the new one, which is done like, it's not bad, but we've also seen fighters out of there like Lucas Martins where they're always like, oh, we're working on his wrestling. He's going to be a better wrestler. He's going to get better at wrestling this time. And then he comes out and he's still not a good wrestler. And we've got Garbrandt at Alpha Male, which seems to be slowly kind of devolving. And then you've got Aljo at Serra-Longo, which always does seems like they get the best out of everybody.
Yeah, and I think too, just Aljo, one of the things about him that people are just kind of like looking by him a little bit is just how inactive he's been through no fault of his own. I mean, how many bouts has he had like signed since the start of 2014? Like, he was scheduled to fight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, and he actually successfully saw 4 of those fights happen. Well, he's going to be 5 when he gets in there and fights Caraway. But he's had 4 cancellations in the last 2 years, which is, obviously sidelined him for a long time. Kid's really good, and I really want to see more of his striking game. It has, just judging by his his social media feed, has been a big focus of his training recently. Just pretty much everything he puts up is hitting the pads, working on something, wrapping up standing, sparring, all this stuff. He really looks like he's trying to. And I think if you're talking about taking like did he start out a bomb squad? Was he a bomb squad guy originally?
Yeah, that's where all the John Jones comparisons came up with him.
Yeah, he kind of had that John Jones striking style that was just like a bunch of weird shit thrown together. And in the last few, or I should say in the Johnny Eduardo fight, you saw the beginning, like the foundation of a striking game starting to emerge from him, where Longo is clearly trying to put in place some solid fundamentals that they can, kind of in the same way of what Mike Winklejohn did for John Jones. And I think hopefully if Sterling's striking starts coming together a little bit, becomes a little bit more complete part of his game, and feeds into his takedowns, which his entries into his takedowns are already really good, then he's going to be a really tough fighter to deal with.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, because the other part for him has been his reliance on a really aggressive athletic kicking game, which tends to fall apart at a high level if you don't have a lot of other stuff to back it up. So it's going to be fascinating to see how he can or if he can deconstruct that, or if he can't, how he can add to it and change that and make it something functional.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. I know he's not at there for this camp, but I think Garbrandt's also spending some time. Yeah, he's spending parts of his camps lately at Jackson Winklejohn training with Brandon Gibson to work on his striking as well, which I think is a great move for him. So hopefully, too, that'll be a big change, something that we can really expect to see out of Garbrandt, because he obviously, he comes from that amateur boxing background.
Yeah.
And he's got fast hands. He obviously knows what to do, how to use his hands well. And he's got the power. But he's definitely seems like he's struggled a lot to find good, consistent combination striking in MMA so far, just due to his inexperience. So I'm really interested to see what Gibson will help him improve and work on. Like I say, I know he's not there for this fight, but
he spends time there. No, it should be interesting.
Yeah.
It should be interesting. I'm really looking forward to that fight. It's not often that we get a prospect matchup headlining a UFC card, especially on Memorial Day. This seems like kind of a little bit of a step down for their usual Memorial Day cards. They usually try to go big on a pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a weird card. Like it just feels like it's a good card, but it feels like kind of a card where they're like, oh, we got to get a bunch of these guys fights, and so here's a bunch of good fun action fights.
Chris Camozzi, get in there against Vitor.
Yeah. They are all fun action fights. So I'll say that.
Yeah, I know. It's gonna be a hell of a night.
So otherwise, just before we get to some of the other fighters coming up on this card, I want to look at some of the other fighters in this bantamweight division, and a couple of guys on the rise that I'm really interested in. Notably, I mean, we've sort of got Jimmy Rivera's kind of jumped in. He's one of the better signings in recent memory for the UFC, and he's come to the UFC basically as a fully formed fighter after his whole prospect development was already done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he came in off the tougher part of the East Coast scene.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, like, had already formed a top, like, a international level MMA game, already had some tough matches, ready to go, and he's fit right in and kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah, he looked great. He's been looking great these past, he's already 3-0 and already cracked the top 15. I know the ranking system is trash, but honestly, like, it's what we have to work with. It's how the UFC makes matches. So you kind of have to use it a little because you realize that those guys are going to get matched up together. And the other fighter that, I'm really interested to see develop coming up here in the near future is Taylor Lapilus, who lost to Eric Perez last time out, but is definitely one of the other fighters that I feel like is almost surefire going to be a fixture at the top of this division in the future.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, we both were a little shocked about his showing against Eric Perez. Like, Perez stepped up to the moment, and it kind of felt like Lapilus let down a little bit.
Well, it was one of those fights, I think, where Lapilus was strong early, but then just kind of ran out of ideas, and Perez was able to, has a lot more experience and was able to dig a lot deeper into that experience to win the fight and kind of gut it.
Yeah, so it is. I think both those guys probably going to be making. Well, one of them already is in the top 15. Going to start getting the higher level matches. Lapilus just needs to get things back on track. But already has, he's already 2-1 in the UFC. I mean, he's going to get a pretty good match coming out because, like we said, like the bantamweight, the lower half, like the low. How many fighters are on the roster at bantamweight?
57.
57. I mean.
Or 55 right now.
55, yeah. So, I mean, like, out of all that, it's amazing how fast guys like Taylor Lapilus gets one more win. He's in there against some pretty big-name guys. It's a really quick division. As we've been saying, it's a really quick division. Just jump out of and get some pretty high-profile fights.
Yeah, there's this kind of a break point where – you got all these guys who are at like 4-0 and all that. 4-0, 3-1, 2-2, tons of guys right in there. And then suddenly you get to, there's nobody with 5 fights in the division. There's one person with 6 fights, one person with 7 fights, and one person with 8 fights, and then everyone else is 9 or more.
Huh.
So you've got this huge slew of people who have 4 or fewer, a very few people who have between 4 and 10, and then the whole rest of the division is 10 or more fights. And it's created a weird divide so that, like, anybody who can do really well in their first 4 fights has a claim to the ranking, a spot in the rankings, because after that, you're starting to get into Yves Jabouin and Francisco Rivera and Brad Pickett and Ronnie Yaya territory, and those guys have all basically kind of fought themselves out of a spot in the rankings at some point in their career already.
Yeah.
So let's jump back to this card then. And we've talked Sterling, Almeida, Garbrandt. Really excited for all these cards. Personally, I do think Almeida is going to beat Garbrandt. I'm not sure that, especially with his training camp all at Alpha Male this time around, I'm really not sure that Garbrandt has the technical depth yet to beat Thomas Almeida on the feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he can take him off his feet all that easily either, considering that he really just does not rely on any offensive wrestling at all.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise on this card,
that power, man.
I know he's got the power to change the fight at any point. The fight I'm probably most excited about otherwise on this card, as far as young talent, I'm sort of in a battle of two. I don't want to say they're similar because they're not, but I feel like they're kind of similar. They came off the same scene, I'm pretty sure, which is Paul Felder and Adam Milstead.
Yeah, I think that should be fun. I think that one, or I'm sorry, the Felder fight and the Milstead fight both should be pretty fun. I'm gonna go Felder because Felder is a lightweight who throws crazy strikes, and Milstead's a heavyweight.
So. I know. You can't ever get too excited about heavyweights.
I mean, but we are seeing more of that. The newer part of the UFC heavyweight roster. I mean, we got two guys who are they're both under 20. They're both under 30, right?
In De La Roca, Milstead, I don't think De La Roca is.
Oh no, De La Roca is not. But like Milstead is one of the rare fighters in the heavyweight division that's under 30 and is still within the first 6 years of his career. Like, he's a legitimate heavyweight prospect in the sense that he's actually a prospect.
Yeah,
I don't know how legitimate he is, like, in terms of a fighter, but I mean, like, he's good. I mean, obviously he's good enough. I mean, in terms of like being like a top 10 potential, but he's actually a prospect within the realm of we consider every other weight class being a prospect, which is novel for heavyweight.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll say this. I think that he reminds me a bit of Todd Duffy, except that he's not quite as he doesn't have the same mechanics of power for single strikes that Duffy has. But he's also a more willing pocket puncher and a more willing wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to work with there.
I think I'm looking forward to that fight just because I want to see what this guy will look like in the UFC. Because, man, there's just such a difference. Like, the heavyweight is one of the ones where there's truly a difference between the UFC and the regional level.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big difference. You're not getting UFC caliber fights at heavyweight on the regional level. Even the trashiest bottom of the roster heavyweight fights are better than 99% of regional heavyweight fights.
Well, the UFC, like, you know, we talked about this before, and I'm just going to mention it really briefly as we talk about Milstead. But like a guy like Chris De La Roca is, you know, he's not. I'm glad Milstead's fighting him because De La Roca is like the very bottom end of UFC heavyweights. He's only had 5 career fights. He's in his mid 30s already. He's very inexperienced, but he represents this class, the prototype of what the UFC is going out and looking to get, which is he's 6'3". He's tough as hell, and he's reasonably physically fit, you know? And that makes for a really tough fight for everybody, any Adam Milstead of the world, who, you know, is also 6'3" and is on the smaller side. But it just means, like, every guy you're going to fight in the UFC is going to be huge and tough and will take all, you know, whatever you can throw at him. And it's a tough place for anybody to climb the ranks and thrive. So
yeah,
I'm interested to see this Milstead fight. I'm interested to see what he can do. I like the guy. He's, you know, he seems like a decent kid. So I'm fascinated to watch his first UFC fight.
Yeah. We have another kind of interesting one in Alberto Uda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's segue to him.
He's a big middleweight.
He is. Like,
he's ideally placed to hang around in the middleweight division for a while because he's huge, he's tough, and he's a grinder. So he's going to fit right in.
He's got the Brazilian version of Cole Pit Muay Thai.
Yeah.
I really like. I'm glad he's exactly the kind of mid-card action fighter that seems to thrive in the UFC middleweight division without ever climbing high enough to be any kind of contender.
Yeah.
In that he's only good at two things. There's like only two things Alberto Uda does well, but he's done them well enough to absolutely blow through the regional scene. And it's clinch offense and guard grappling. And that is it. He does not have a range striking game. He does not have a top game, a grappling top game. He does not wrestle. It's clinch striking, guard grappling. That might be enough for him to beat Jake Collier.
Yeah, might be. Jake Collier. Yeah. Jake Collier, I'm a little less excited about seeing. Pretty much coming off the regional scene as mostly a finished fighter, like, you know, pretty much. Well past being a finished fighter. Sorry, he's been fighting since like 2008. So tough veteran without a ton. Oh no, sorry.
He started in 2010.
2010. Sorry, he's been fighting amateur MMA since 2008. So like one of those guys that started pro, but like fought 3 years of amateurs before that.
Yeah, I don't hold that against him. The biggest thing I think that I've seen for him is that he came out of a really tiny camp, and he jumps around training all the time around the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And he just has this janky game that's kind of built off of like, oh, I learned this when I went to this gym, so I do that. And I've learned this when I went to this gym, so I do that. And there's no one – he's not a great wrestler. He's not a great grappler. He's not a great striker. He just has all of these things he kind of does all right.
Yeah.
And it's cost him in the UFC because he can't push the fight in any one place. So he'll be –
So he's probably going to be against the fence in this fight.
Yeah. He'll be doing okay against Vitor Miranda and then end up striking too long with him and get knocked out, or do okay against Dong Yang and then just get muscled around and knocked out. And yeah. He even pretty much had Ricardo Abreu like outworked and still barely eked that fight out for a split decision. It's just one of those things where he just doesn't seem to be able to hold the fight in any one area and keep winning it. So I kind of have to think that Uda is going to do well against him just because his clinch game is so strong and his guard grappling game is so good. Yeah.
No, I would agree. I think Uda is going to get the win, and he's going to look giant compared to Jake.
Like, they're both 6'3".
Oh, are they 6'3"? I think I looked at the wrong guy then. I did. I looked at someone. I think I might have kicked. Who did I click on then?
Shane Campbell?
Yeah, maybe. Who's like 5'11"?
Yep.
Yeah.
5'11" has been fighting since 2008.
Yeah. Yep, so I clicked on the wrong guy, and I was like, geez, it's going to look like different weight classes in there. Probably because it would have been.
Yes. Not Shane Campbell, Jake Collier. Shane Campbell's fighting Eric Koch in a matchup of guys you would almost think are prospects, but are not.
No, not.
Because they've both been fighting for a long time.
Yeah.
But
how many renditions of Eric Koch have we seen? Like,
I don't know. I haven't seen Eric Koch fight in years, so I can't even think of
this
it.
Guy was supposed to. I mean, like, this guy was supposed to fight Aldo in like 2012.
Yeah,
that was like right in the midst of like the. That was right in the midst of like the Aldo's never healthy. But like,
and also unbeatable. That was back in all those unbeatable days.
Yeah.
So that kind of wraps up the prospects of this card. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of looking at the people who aren't prospects.
No.
But we've got a few people kicking around on the regionals this week as well. Most notably, I'd say probably the best complete prospect cards belong to KSW and ONE FC, surprisingly.
Yep. Yeah. KSW has Gamrot fighting probably one of the,
Mansour Barnaoui in a great fight, in a lightweight title fight.
yeah, and Gamrot's probably like one of the 6-7 best prospects in MMA, like depending on how you rank it out. I mean, like really good lightweight fighter, kind of a karate-ish dude on the feet, but really good athlete and strong in every phase. Glad not only did KSW find him an opponent, found him a quality opponent.
Yeah, I mean, Mansour Barnaoui is one of those fighters that, like, you look at his record and just on on the outside, and you're like, this guy's not really. He's 12-3. That's but honestly, he's a very, very good athlete and a very good fighter who's just still trying to work all the kinks out of his game. Like, he's beat Colin Fletcher and Kurt Warburton and Maxim Divnich and Ivan Musardo. And, like, those are all really legit names. And his losses are to Islam Makhachev, Kevin Lee, and Ivan Butchinger. So he's only losing to top talent, and he's beat some top talent. And he's one of those fighters that could get locked out of the UFC forever because he always loses that one fight that might have gotten him a contract offer.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the who's Baboon in World Series of Fighting? You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Not Patino, but
I don't remember.
He fought Patino.
I don't remember.
Got it. Luis. Oh man, who am I trying to think of? Luis Palomino. He could have the Luis Palomino problem, where Palomino is very obviously a very good, fun, solid action fighter, but loses one fight once every year, like once every 4 or 5 fights, he loses once, and it's just always enough to keep him on the outside.
Yeah.
So, this Barnaoui Gamrot fight, that looks like a great one, and they've also got Filip Wolanski on that card, who's a really solid Polish fighter, good striker, good athlete. Yeah. I'm looking forward to Wolanski's fighting Marcin Prachnio, recent UFC cut, the Polish zombie.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough regional fight.
Yeah. I mean, like, he got cut from the UFC, didn't look phenomenal against Julian Rosa, but, I mean, last man to beat Arnold Allen. Trying to remember, didn't he was fairly competitive with Chris Fishgold too, wasn't he? Yeah, like this is a tough regional test guy. He's probably going to end up being like a quadruple A fighter.
Yeah.
But
and really, they've also got a guy I'm interested on that, an English fighter, Azi Thomas. I haven't actually scouted him yet, but he's got a good-looking young undefeated record, a lot of stoppages.
Azi Thomas?
Yeah, Azi Thomas.
Isn't he 6-1?
Is he? Oh, does he have a loss? Okay.
Oh, it's a disqualification though.
Yeah. Okay. That's why I was like, he's undefeated, because his only loss is a DQ. Fought in Cage Warriors a couple times, and I'm interested to see what he can do. Fighting on this KSW card, like I say, that should be a good solid card. And then the ONE FC card too has Marat Gafarov.
Yep. Who's part of this? He is one of the front runners in the wave of like Russian Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighters, where like we've talked a lot about the Russian apparatus of combat sports and how they've gotten behind MMA. Also, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is one of the things that they've kind of gotten behind, and there is a small but growing, very talented portion of the Russian scene that is doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu quite intensely and looking to be champions at it. And Gafarov is one of those fighters who like was one of the forerunners of the guys like doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and getting good at it.
Well, they kind of have to, because they've gotten behind MMA, which means that they got to take part and parcel all the parts that go with it. So, that they're not going to half-ass their dive into a combat sports program. So
Yeah,
if they're getting into MMA, they've got to take grappling, or they've got to take BJJ with it.
that's one of the things that not Vadim Netkov. Who am I thinking of here? Shoot, who am I thinking of?
I got
nothing. Please continue on. There's a well-known sambo coach who lives in the United States.
Oh, okay.
And he has basically said that like he goes back to Russia every so often to train, and he does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu here in the United States also. And he is extremely excited for the rising Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community in Vlad Kuliakov. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. Vlad Kuliakov talking about it and saying that like he thinks in a couple of years the Russians are going to make a big showing at Worlds and like shock the Brazilians because they're really coming up in level, and Gamrot's got a really slick ground game, good all around fighter to go with it also.
So another guy I'm excited about on this ONE FC card is somebody I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't have it right off the top of my head, that we scouted for our light heavyweights. Looked at a bit, Marcin Prachnio.
Yeah, we can take a look at him. So he's
if I'm remembering correctly, he's one of those dudes that's like a very good athlete and trying to learn all the parts to make himself a good potential fighter. He's 10-2 now, and he's fighting Leandro Atitis in ONE FC. So I'm really excited, looking for that fight. Between Gafarov and Prachnio, those are a couple of interesting prospects to watch out for. Also, there's this Eagles FC card in Romania, which has Vlad Popvskiy, the lightweight and welterweight fighter, and Wojciech Lach, Polish fighter that I'm kind of a light heavyweight Polish fighter that seems to be on the rise. So there's some talent out there.
There's also the weekly ACB card at this point. Like,
yeah, we've got the regular contingent of top level Russian MMA cards. We've got European Fight Nights, Absolute Championship Berkut, and M1 Global all this week.
ACB is pretty loaded with like. I was gonna say the ACB card. Like a lot of younger fighters who are like 4-0, 4-1 sort of guys that just like the whole card's loaded with them. Like almost every fight has an intriguing guy in it. So it's definitely worth if you got free time on this Friday, fire up the YouTube stream and take a look and see,
And EFN's going to be on obviously over on Fight Pass. And they've got, light heavyweight Kurban Omarov and featherweight Movlid Khaibulaev and lightweight Ramil Mustapayev. And they're all these Russian cards. There's always some guy that's like 4-0, 5-0, 6-0 that you never know which of those guys is going to get a couple wins and have just the right connections to be on their way to the UFC.
Yeah.
Whether it's through the Habib Training Network or K Dojo or a move, maybe training with like Ali Bagatinov or somebody like that. Like they're just all these random avenues that might lead one of these guys to a bigger stage. So it's always good to pay attention to those Russian cards when you can. Also, over on Aspera in Brazil, one of the more can-crushing-y Brazilian promotions, Ricardo Ramos is coming off his featherweight, or his defeat, rather, the bantamweight. Ricardo Ramos is coming off his Legacy FC defeat in stateside, bouncing back against a reasonably good-looking Brazilian prospect, at least on paper. Ramos is one of the more top-flight, athletic, and aggressive prospects out there, so I'm really excited to see him back in action. They've got a rising heavyweight Tiago Cardoso as well. So those Aspera cards too, those are other jumping off points for some random Brazilians that make their way stateside, because they tend to rack up really impressive records that don't necessarily have a lot of depth, but that's where you get fighters like Darren Till sometimes, and some of the more some random guys that the UFC will pick up or Bellator will pick up and who can take off.
Yeah.
So plenty to watch prospect-wise. It's not like, I would say comparatively, there aren't as many big-name elite prospects out there this week as there are other weeks, but
still some good stuff.
Yeah, but between all the European cards and the ONE FC card and a couple of the Brazilian cards, there's still some good stuff to watch out for if you're looking for young fighters that might make a jump to a bigger promotion.
Yeah.
On that note, that wraps up our show for this week. You can find me on Twitter at TheseAnytime. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us over at Bloody Elbow. Subscribe to the MMANation.com YouTube channel. It's DOTCOM. That way you get all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, interviews, all that good shit. Give us a like on YouTube. That's a thumbs up. That helps us a bunch. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.